Hello and welcome to episode 14 of Shared Discovery, the show and podcast dedicated to sharing all the exciting and enjoyable aspects of games and gaming. I'm your host, Victor, and today I'm once again joined by Ron. Ron, how you been? What you been up to?
Hey everybody, I'm all right, just living life the best I can right now.
Yeah.
Playing games, taking it easy.
You better play games. That's research.
Yes.
For the show.
It feels good that it's research.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah, double purpose.
Yeah. What games have you been playing?
Oh man, I've really been getting into computer RPG games, isometric perspective, Kingmaker, Pathfinder games.
Nice.
I've been scratching that itch.
That's awesome.
What about yourself?
It's been hard for me to switch from Divinity to those kinds of games because, like, you've told me this, like, Divinity's just so clean.
Too good. Yeah.
Too good. So it's been really hard for me to try those. But I actually, after our vampire episode, I started The Witcher.
Okay.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's super fun. I'm really impressed, obviously. It's so good. I love how cinematic it is, how much voice acting there is. Combat is great.
It's so fluid.
And this is for me as a card gamer. I really liked Gwent.
Yes.
The card game. I was like, oh, I know card games. Sign me up.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of The Witcher 3 is Gwent, because it's actually based on a card game that I own called Condottiere.
Okay.
And they like openly admit, like, yeah, we loved that game so much that we just kind of stole the mechanics and made a game for Witcher in our spare time.
We have to play that then. I didn't know you had that. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I was super impressed, and it's like you can buy cards from vendors and you get cards from quests in the game. Like, what a fun mini game.
And it's so like surreal because all of the cards are characters in the game or things in the game. So then it's like kind of a meta, like breaking the fourth wall. Like the characters of the game have cards about them in the game that you can play with. Is kind of weird.
That's so interesting. Is there ever any dialogue that like references, "Hey, I have your card"?
No, it stays pretty silent.
Okay, that's just the extra thing. Cool.
You can always play Gwent with people, like everyone plays Gwent, but no one talks about Gwent.
They don't have podcasts about it.
No.
Gwent. So I was really impressed with that, along with everything else. I knew I would love the game, so I finally have a computer that can handle it. So I'm super excited to get into that. But other than that, I haven't been playing too much because we just have, again, been watching One Piece. The dub is almost caught up. Finally. As dub watchers, we've been waiting a little while, but it's been worth it. The quality keeps going up and up. But that's enough about what we've been doing.
Yeah.
Today we're going to do another game deep dive. We haven't done one of these since episode 5 with 5 Minute Dungeon. We talked about a specific board game, so that's what we're going to talk about today, one of our favorite games. But before we do that, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Here, let me make sure I don't mess this up.
Yeah, lay it on me, Victor. What's the question?
Do you think might is right?
No. I guess. I mean, no.
Okay, mostly no.
But like, that's just like how things work. So I don't know. That's a tough question. It's like why do you breathe? Like, I don't know. I need to.
I need some time to explain that.
Right? Like, why do cars? Like, why do the rules of the law work? Because like, there's consequences. There's like violent extortion from the police or whatever, where they take your money if you drive bad. Like,
So there's explanations, but it's like, why am I asking you? How does this sound like a game podcast?
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough.
But that's because we're talking about a game that takes that idea, might is right, to the logical conclusion. And you've probably seen it right behind us here for those YouTube watchers and those podcast listeners. Today we're talking about Root, a game of woodland might and right.
Yeah, we sure are. And it is definitely about that game, that type of exactly what it says, might and right. Might makes right.
And This is your favorite, one of your favorite?
Top tier.
Top tier.
I love Cole Wehrle games just because of the conversations that they generate and like the ideas that are being played with, especially in Root. And his later games since then, like I even have Oath back here, kind of work with these same ideas and develop them out in different ways. So, yeah, huge fan.
So, I haven't played as deeply, I haven't gone into the philosophies as deeply, but we played this past week just to get ready for this episode, and you told me a lot about the real-world philosophies that this game tries to create with its mechanics.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be good right at the beginning to kind of give an overview like you gave me.
Okay.
Give an overview to the listeners. What is Root? Where does this philosophy might is right come from?
Sure. So, long time, like it's very historiographic, so lots of historical references, lots of like ideas that have been developing in the last few hundred years and stuff. So bear with me, I'm not a philosopher, but
A good disclaimer.
Yeah, I do know a little bit about it. Is like for a long time there was like divine mandate, rule of kings is like belief and faith is like what got you power, and then it was like personal possession and stuff, a very basic feudal type of a society where you have the king and then the lords and then the peasants, right? And that's about it. There's not a lot going on there. But then there was a lot of revolutions in the 18th century, and you get all these different perspectives on power, and that's what this game is trying to show you. But also, it's bringing a like really weird idea of like modern warfare, which is really based around insurgency and counterinsurgency. Like that's what has developed out of all these hundreds of years of history. Is we now have like small groups of people fighting big groups of people, this asymmetric warfare, right? You have the United States fighting Afghanistan and the Taliban, and like that's not symmetric warfare, right? It's completely asymmetrical. And so this game is trying to bring the concept of asymmetric warfare, which is usually left to the like really dusty games about like with no graphics, and they're just like grids and spreadsheets and like this really heady you see you wincing.
Ooh, what are those, Euro?
War games. They're called coin games, counterinsurgency.
Okay.
So they're usually about conflicts like Afghanistan, where one side plays the United States and one side plays the Taliban, and you essentially reenact the Afghan conflict and try to win for your particular side using counterinsurgency tactics.
So this game's trying to make this more easy to digest.
Yeah, palatable.
Palatable.
Right.
Yeah.
So using fuzzy, furry animals to do like terrorism.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because you're going to play, as you see if we go through the episode,
right.
The factions you play are going to be cats and different various birds and woodland creatures like raccoons and owls and mice.
Yep. And it's very much like a war of ideas now. Instead of a war for territory or a war for clout, it's a war for power. And power is ideas and people, and like all these things sort of fold into each other, right? Is the whole counterinsurgency and way of fighting, asymmetrical warfare, simplified and sort of boiled down to its most simple component.
It makes it more approachable.
Yes.
Easier to enter for people that like me that are, like said, I wince. I like, listeners know I like my Ameritrash. I like my pretty art, my colors, right?
Yeah.
So you showed Root, I'm like, okay, sign me up.
Right.
And that made it easy for when you start telling me this philosophy. I'm like, wow, that's super interesting. And part of that has allowed me to pick out factions that I resonate with, right? So we'll talk more about the philosophy as we go through the episode and talk about the 4 base game factions.
Right.
But I wanted to get that out there at the beginning. That is the core, that's the underlining principle for the game, and it says it right in the title, right? Might and right.
You got it.
So now let's just get into an overview. We talked about like a broad philosophical idea. Let's go in just a little bit. And Root, so this is right off the box, right? So Root is a fast-paced game of adventure and war. You will play as one of the, in the base game, you're going to play as one of the 4 factions vying to show that you are the most legitimate to rule the vast woodland. And for those that are listening, the podcast listeners, you might want to check out the YouTube because we have the game set up in front of us, and there's a lot of visuals that we'll be referencing throughout the episode that you can see us pointing to and just really see what we're talking about.
That's right. This whole game is just a visual feast.
It is, absolutely. And so when we talk about vying for control of the woodland, the map is literally a woodland with forests and clearings and places to build. There's a river going through it. Visual feast, absolutely. So and again, we're going to be talking about the base game here with the 4 factions. These 4 factions are trying to get from 0 to 30 points, which represents you as the legitimate ruler of the woodland.
Right. It's kind of like power.
Power.
How much power do you have?
And so, as you'll see when we talk about break down each faction, each turn, it's an asymmetric game as you were talking about. But each faction, something that's common across them is they have their turns split into 3 phases: birdsong, daylight, and evening. And once you play these phases in order, your turn ends, and the player to the left begins. So that's the similarity, but you have to really refer to your card to see what's different during your birdsong, during your daylight, during your evening.
Right.
And so I touched on it a little here, but we're going to go through and give an overview of how each of these 4 factions wins the game.
Yes.
And so, like I said, the goal is to get 30 victory points, or there's an alternate win condition called a dominance card.
Right, which I'd like to say right off the bat is usually, like 9 times out of 10, a bad option.
It's really hard. I've probably played 10 times. I've seen the card played once, and it didn't win them the game.
No.
It's really hard because you have to it's an alternate win condition that requires you to control 3 matching territory.
Right.
And control is hard in this game, as you'll see.
And as soon as somebody sees you play that card, they're like, no. Everyone immediately
stop them.
Yeah, starts jumping on you to make sure you don't win.
Exactly. So the most common win condition is getting from 0 to 30 victory points, which victory points will be attained in different ways throughout the game. Each faction has their own ways to get victory points, and factions share ways to get victory points by destroying other factions' resources. So starting with the cats, called the Marquis des Cats, they wish to exploit the woodland using its vast resources to fuel their economy and military machine. They score by constructing buildings throughout the woodland.
Yep.
So your goal, spread out, build.
Yep, industrialism to build an economy which will then convince people that you are the most powerful in the woodlands because you have, oh, look at all these factories. Oh, they cut so much wood every day. I'm so fancy, and I have profits and board of directors.
Yes.
Yep.
So how about the birds? What are the birds' goal? What is their title?
So the birds are sort of old school type of power, right? They are like a plug and play. They have to bow down to the whims of their number, so they're more of a council, right? Council politics, council committee type of power, where they're all aristocrats and they may co-rule or elect a ruler, which is usually represented by these leader cards, as they appoint a leader who rules for a certain amount of time, whether it be a despot or a builder, depending on what you're going for, commander. And their whole thing is they're trying to reclaim the forest from the cats as the actual legitimate rulers of the forest, right? The aristocracy is, we have lineage and paperwork saying that we've ruled this forest forever. And we're just coming back to get it back from you because, well, you've taken care of it for now, but your rampant industrialism is...
We're back. We can have it.
Yeah.
Thank you. We can take it from here.
Really?
Yeah.
It's the like elite of the elite, the aristocracy, the moneyed people, pretty much throwing their ring in or their hat into the ring for ruling the woodlands.
And then after oh, we forgot to say those are the Erie dynasty.
Yeah, the Erie dynasties.
Yes.
They generally put down roosts, and they score points based off those roosts every single turn, and they just want to get as many of them down on the board as they can, because more is more points. And they have a disdain for crafting, so they generally don't gain points from crafting, but they are very aggressive, very powerful, and they can have more actions than any other faction in the game because of their clever, like plug and play, like a robot, like you're programming a robot almost.
Yes.
Is a good way to think of it. But how it's expressed in the game is like these are your counselors, or these are the laws that have been passed, or these are the people that have power in your government. These are the aristocrats that are allowing you to do all of these crazy actions because they're giving you their power.
Yeah.
And when you fail them, they say, sayonara, see ya.
See ya.
You lose points, and all of these cards at the top in your decree is what it's called, which is executed during your daylight, during your turn. It's just a list of actions that you go through, and you can execute that column's actions in any order, just as long as you do all of them.
Going left to right.
Left to right.
Yep.
And then as soon as you can't do one, I'm so sorry, your government collapses.
Collapse, you go into turmoil.
Turmoil. And then it resets, and you get a new leader, and you get a new decree, which relocates these viziers, and you can start plugging cards into it and building up your action pool again. Yeah. It's very, like, has a lot of energy and then kind of peters out. And
Goes
then
down throughout that towards the end.
Right.
Okay. Back and forth type of play style.
Right.
It sounds like.
And it's very reliant on people paying attention to your game, as opposed to a lot of these are you're watching other people's games. This is you have to watch other people watch your game.
You have to watch your engine to make sure you're not going into turmoil.
Right, and convincing people, hey, don't do that because that will mess up my game and stuff. And there's a lot more politicking in that way.
Okay. So that is the birds. These are the two empire factions. Is that what they're called? So,
yeah, empires or states. Or more legitimate forms of control that people would see is like the police and the industrialists with the cats, and then there's the aristocratic elites, these old houses that ruled for hundreds of years.
Yes.
Right? These are well-established powers that seek to control everything.
Okay. And so these are the bigger, legitimate, like you said.
A little more legitimate.
Little bit more legitimate. So these next two are the insurgents. They're trying to fight against the rule of the cats and the birds.
Right.
So,
and who's to say that's not legitimate, right?
and who's to say that's not legit? So tell us about the Woodland Alliance. They would say they're legitimate.
Right, because they're the people. All these cards on the backs here, I don't know which camera, but on the backs is most of these critters are the Woodland Alliance. The only one that's really not is the birds. The birds are, of course, the Erie dynasties, but they're wild. They'll work for anyone or anything because they're just moneyed or mercenaries or free. They don't really have to adhere to anyone. They're more people than like poor people are because they have the money and means to actually do things.
Yeah.
That's where birds kind of fit in, is they have wings so they can fly anywhere, so they have that status.
Okay.
And the rest of them are the little creatures of the forest. They're the Woodland Alliance, and sure, the foxes are kind of more of a predator creature, but they're still small folk in the forest, in this metaphor, right? Is they fit in with the mice and the rabbits in the forest, is they're more of in some industry, militant in some ways, the foxes. The rabbits are mercantile. They care about banking and card value. And the mice are more like crafty or care about like unique actions and things of that nature. Like,
yeah, and I think it's important too, right here, we could talk about just how important these cards are to the game.
Yeah.
Because there's a deck with the 54 cards, I think I remember.
Right.
And each card And so the back of them that Ron was talking about is split into 4 pictures. It has a yellow rabbit, red fox, orange mouse, and a blue bird. And so when you actually look at the cards, this is the predominant resource for every faction. Every faction can benefit from getting these cards. And you were telling, and we were talking about this in the pre-show, that these cards represent the citizens of the Woodland.
Right, the denizens.
The folk that each faction is trying to get on their side.
Right. And every time you discard or play a card or use a card, it's essentially you're using this person and their power, because every person has power. It's just when you combine people's power, it's more powerful. And when you use people's power, generally in this game, you use them, you discard them, you burn them up, you essentially use all of their power up as an individual. Whenever you play them, whenever you craft, it's like, oh, you're having this rabbit make this trinket for you, and then that's kind of like all that rabbit's really good for, or they go back, or they're used up, or they die from overwork, or any number of explanations can be given for actual use of these cards. But yeah, like you said, biopower.
It is.
These are the people.
Yes. And each of these cards has one of 4 suits, which again is represented on the back of the card, but you have the yellow rabbits, the red fox.
Shown at the top here.
Shown at the top, in the top left-hand corner of the card. And then you have the orange mice, and then you also have the blue bird. And the bird serves as the wild card for the game. And again, you'll have to refer to each board. That could change, but that's generally the rule.
Right.
The bird card, because they can fly anywhere, and the forest can be used for any purpose.
Right. Birds are a little more free than the rest of the cards.
Birds are, I want to fly.
Right?
I wish I had wings.
You can go anywhere. You can do anything. You can just pick up and move right now. Whereas a rabbit is more tied to the forest, their dens, their burrows, their warrens. They take pride in community. Same with the mice and the foxes and stuff, right? They're more sedentary than the birds. The birds can just fly around. And that's also how they're characterized as well in the game, is through how the cards are used and crafted, and they express themselves. And also how the factions use the cards. It expresses the type of power the faction is exerting. So the Woodland Alliance, going back to that.
Sorry to cut you off there.
Yeah, a little tangent, little digression, moving into the cards to talk about it, because I pretty much already talked about it, because the Woodland Alliance really cares about these cards. It's a great beginner faction because it makes you pay attention to these suits, which is another way of making you pay attention to the people in the woodland, the country, in the world out there. Because the Woodland Alliance is an insurgency. It's like a communist vanguard party type of a revolution, where it's not like the people are rising up. There's a small group of people that want the people to rise up, so they are forming a party to go out and organize people, right? And organize a sort of communist revolution, or they could even be the Taliban, because the Taliban operate in the same way as, say, a communist insurgency, because a lot of insurgencies are just insurgencies, right? Most revolutionary insurgency groups, the IRA, oh God, I probably shouldn't talk about the IRA, but like a lot of these organizations end up dealing drugs and things like that, and that's reflected in the Woodland Alliance's like weird amorphism. Like, it doesn't come out and say I am a communist vanguard party, but it doesn't say I am the Taliban, but it's kind of like these aren't so different, right? They're both fighting for freedom. They're both an insurgent group. There's a small number of people inside the country that aren't necessarily all the people, but they say that they fight for the people. And so there's the metaphor, right? That's all you need to do to fit into that Woodland Alliance section, is fight for the people.
And it's perfectly represented in 2 of their main mechanics. Is spreading sympathy throughout the woodland and having people revolt, creating revolts throughout the woodland.
Right, and they're always spreading sympathy to so that when people get angry, they can sort of channel that anger back at the states and back at the responsible parties. And I would argue that their biggest mechanic that only unlocks once they get on the board, and they get a base on the board, which not only gives them card draw, which is more people for your cause, right? Thinking of it in like that metaphor, right, of a real world organization. Their biggest power is in military operations is organize. It removes your warrior and replaces it with a sympathy, which uses less people than using your supporters.
Okay.
So less cards being used.
Yeah.
And it's just more efficient because you can always train up new soldiers and
Yeah.
send them out to do like door-to-door organizing, pamphleteering, and stuff like that.
That's great. And
Yeah.
I feel like everything you said is, and all of these is so well represented in their mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is an overview of the Woodland Alliance. Again, we'll go more deeply into the play styles and strategies for these, but the last one we have here is the Vagabond.
Oh, the Vagabond.
And the Vagabond is represented by, you said, folk heroes or folk legends.
Yeah.
And the cards that you'll see here is you at the start of your game, you'll pick your specific starting Vagabond, and you have, what is that, a badger?
Some of these are expansion
Raccoon.
Vagabonds, so
Okay.
just be aware of that.
Okay, so some of these will come with the expansion, but these are just creatures, folk heroes that live in the forest. You have a wolf, a raccoon, a badger, an owl, a squirrel. Just these creatures that throughout the game you're going to play as your only one piece. This is how it's different from every faction. You'll play as one piece.
Yep.
You'll move out the game trying to do what's best for you, honestly. You're going to get items that you can help fight with, you can make allies, you can make hostilities, and both of these will get you points. It's just depending on the play style that you want to have throughout the game.
Right.
And throughout the game, you are looking for more items to give you more actions, because each of these characters here, so I took the Arbiter, for example, they each have their starting items. And he starts with boot, torch, and 2 swords, and each of these items pertain to an action that you can do in the game. And throughout the game, you're going to go to the ruins to get items. You're going to complete quests that are on the cards to get more items.
Right.
And you'll make deals with other players to get more items throughout the game. And so you're building up, getting more and more loot throughout the game.
And it's just, every single one of these factions is a conversation with power. Like, every single one of them is an expression of power, an idea of power, and that, like, approach to power, right? And the Vagabond sits squarely in the, I'm going to collect material possessions, I'm going to collect weapons, I'm going to collect swords, boots, everything I need that's made in the woodlands, material wealth, and I'm going to use that to prove my worthiness.
And so that really sums up the core, like the overview of each of the 4 factions, their philosophies, and how you're going to try to get to those 30 points. And this is not a rules episode. I think there would probably be a few episodes to do it justice.
Right.
But I wanted to touch on here, for those that are learning the game actually comes with 3 different rule books to help you learn the game. And so it comes with a rules reference that this is for those who just really strictly like the defined formal rules without the graphics, and it's just concise, right? You go in, you read it, you can play. You don't need the pictures, you don't need the diagrams.
Right.
But they do have the pictures and the diagrams in the learning to play guide. And I think this one is probably the most that you and I've referred to the most, because it does have diagrams, does have examples, and it's easier to look at.
That's one thing that it kept from the genre that this is trying to bring to the people. The counterinsurgency genre is incredibly war game difficult and dense, and like you said, no graphics, and it doesn't want you to play it. It's just staring at you and being like, I dare you, come over here. Yeah. I don't look fun.
I don't look fun.
But you're gonna do it.
You're gonna do it.
And
it might not be enjoyable.
Right. That's just that sort of.
So that's the rules reference that's coming from that genre.
Right. So that's why coming to this, it's crazy complicated, but that's because it comes from a lineage of even crazier complication.
More complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just yeah, you like have to make these games your life if you're going to be playing them. It's like studying. It's like going back to school.
Oh man. And so this game comes with walkthrough guides. Do those exist in that genre?
No.
No. Okay.
Unless like some fan made them.
Some
and I don't
fan
know.
made them, but if you're going to play the game, you know what you're signing up for. Be prepared to read a book. But this game's like, okay, we're trying to make it more approachable, easier to get into. So it actually has some walkthrough guides that will walk you through the first couple turns of the game.
Right.
And give you some strategies and how to take your actions to make this easier. So we recommend for the first games, ignore the hard to read concise rules. Use that as a reference. We found that that's really good once you're super familiar with the rules, going back to that as a reference guide.
Or if you're like a rules lawyer type of person and you
Yeah.
need to know everything, like all the niche cases and stuff, feel free
It
to
is
read
short.
through it.
It's about half as many pages, right? Because it's taking out those graphics. And if that's the type of person you are,
Oh yeah.
absolutely do that. We actually love having friends like that in the group that just love combing through the rules.
Oh, yeah.
Those are great to have because they're like, all right, it's on this page, here it is. Like, thank you. Game's more fun if we know the rules.
Exactly. Like it's one thing to have a rules lawyer, but if you actually like, okay, but don't be rude about it, then like, yeah, that transfer of knowledge is so.
I think our friend Sam was really good about this.
Yeah?
He was rules down to the point, but he was super nice. Like, here's where it is. I want us to all follow it together so we have a good time.
Yeah, he was really good.
He was
about
really good about that. But use what works for you, and that's what we can say about it, you know.
Yeah.
And for us, I really liked the Learn to Play guide when I was reading for this episode, and the walkthroughs were really nice. I didn't have to use them because you taught, but like just reading through them, it was so succinct, really clean.
Yeah, it really goes to show that a nice, clean starting guide can just get anybody into it. I even used that with my mother, and she can play Root now.
Really?
I don't know if she fully gets it, but
She can play it.
She's won.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, she's cutthroat, so.
Wow. Okay. That's a testament to the quality of these walkthrough guides.
Right.
And your skills as a teacher.
Yes, and my mother's bloodthirstiness, which is ever present.
Wow. I feel like that's a theme of this whole show.
Is it?
Your mother's bloodthirst.
She's looming over it,
Yeah.
dripping blood everywhere.
Sorry, the vampire episode.
Oh God, is she a vampire?
Is she?
Is that what you're implying right now?
It might be. So we just wanted to touch on that, but now we're going to we dive deeper into the functions of each of the factions.
Yes.
And give you some strategies on that we think are pretty relevant to winning with them or trying to win with them. So to start, when you set up the game, we already have set it up, but I think it's important to point out that on the back of each of these boards, there is a setup that walks you through setup with a letter next to them. So make sure you're setting up in letter order. So the cats are A, the Erie Dynasty, the birds are B, Woodland Alliance is C, and the Vagabond is D. And it's important to set up in order because that will influence how the game unfolds. The order of gameplay is still random, determined by a die roll, but setup is important that way.
Right.
So we're going to go out and set up order to talk about each of these factions.
Okay.
Is what that is. So
We're going to set aside the whole like philosophy of oppression and stuff like that, and talk more about like how do you actually win the
the
game.
rules, the nitty gritty. So the cats, the Marquis des Cat. So the Marquis des Cat occupies the woodland and wants to turn it into an industrial and military powerhouse. And they do this by each time they build, they'll create a workshop, sawmill, or recruiters. And they score by when they create underneath these little chips here, there's a victory point amount that you get for building these. And on the board here, there are these little square slots that you can build in if you rule the area. And ruling a clearing is having the most pieces there.
is the most warriors and buildings.
Most warriors and buildings. So you're trying to build as many of these as possible because these get more and more points. And even the recruiters, if you build enough of those, that will get you more cards. We talked about how important getting those cards in, getting the people on your side to build your empire.
Yep. Every single faction is hungry for cards.
And so the more of the same building that you build on the map, the more score you get, right? So you'll need more and more wood to do it, but if you're able to get to some of these, there's 5 in each of these rows, but if you're able to get, I guess there's 6 in each of these rows, but 1 of each starts out on the board. But if you're able to get to these later ones, like 5 or 5 or 6, you're getting 4, 3 victory points. Like, that's a lot when there's only 30 points in the game.
Oh, yeah.
And so to do that, you have to get wood. Wood, there's an amount above each of these that shows how much wood you need to craft these. And to do that, you have to create sawmills, which I guess is a good time now to go through the phases of the turn.
Sure.
So like we said earlier, each faction will do different things, but they have the same turn structure. So starting with birdsong here, the cats on each of their sawmills are out. They're gonna make a wood. And then you move into daylight. Simple, easy birdsong. I like cat's birdsong. It feels good. Putting woods. Yeah, that felt good. Then daylight. This is the main action phase, right? So during daylight, you can take up to 3 actions, or 1 more for bird cards that you have. You can spend those to take an extra action, but essentially for the cats, every turn you have 3 actions to march, which is moving your pieces, battling, which is battling. You're fighting your pieces against others. You can recruit more warriors, depending where your recruiter pieces are. You can build these buildings, which we talked about is really important, and then you can overwork. So you can spend a card to place 1 wood at a sawmill matching a clearing. And that matching clearing, so on the board, each clearing has a suit attached to it. So one of the 3 suits that we talked about. And that's daylight. You have 3 actions, and it's very, very important that as the cats, you're making the most of your actions.
And the commonly forgotten mechanic of the cats is the whole wood needs a supply line to be used. So you can't just use any wood. Say you have a sawmill on the complete opposite side of the map.
I see.
And there's some birds here. This sawmill that's on the other side of the map, if it produces wood and you want to use that, you would have to create a sort of a line of rule where you rule clearings all the way back to the keep in order for you to use that wood, or it's, well, I guess technically it's any clearing that you rule that's connected to it. So you could build here in the clearing where the sawmill is at, but you couldn't say build over here because they're not
I see what you mean.
controlled by you, right?
If it's not connected.
Right.
Able to build over.
So it doesn't necessarily have to do with the keep. It just is like if I'm building a building at my keep, I can't use the wood that's across the map because I don't have a way to get the wood there, essentially.
Yeah, and so when cats set up, they place 1 warrior in every spot except one spot, because in 1 corner of the map they're going to place their keep token. You can only place pieces in the clear. Only you, as the cats, can place pieces there. And there's no way to get your keep back if it's destroyed. And so you want to protect that throughout the game.
Right. The game is pretty built on the rules of root, but every single faction breaks the rules in some way. The cats have some of the most powerful abilities, but they have some of the most limited actions. Because having 3 actions is very constricting.
3 and sometimes more if you have a bird card.
Sometimes, if you get lucky,
if you get lucky. And that's why the birds it's super important that you are using your actions to their maximum potential. Because you're not really, you can't plan on having more like other factions can.
Exactly, and there's no easy way to get more, and they're only temporary, and they get less valuable as the game goes on because everybody else will start getting more actions, and you won't be getting that same action generation, right?
And the Cats was one of the ones I played to practice, and in juxtaposition to the Vagabond that I played before that, I was like, wow, I feel like I'm stagnated. I feel like I'm stuck.
Right.
Because the Vagabond and other factions just are getting more and more action throughout the game.
Constantly doing
like,
stuff.
And I felt like I was constantly misplaying. So I'm like, wow, I used that action to move. Why did I do that?
Right.
What am I doing? Right. And so with 3, you have to be very precise. And this is a faction that rewards knowledge. Rewards knowledge of what all of the other factions can do, how they can do it, so that you can, thinking back to our politics and table talk episode, you can make these deals that you need to keep your engine going.
Because a common refrain online is thinking of the Cats like the police, and you're not really good at like negotiation. You're not really good at like fighting, but what you're good at is manpower. You have more shooters than anybody else. It doesn't matter if they can hit a target as long as one of them can hit a target. You have more Cats than pretty much any of the other starting factions because that's your best bet, is to just drown people in bodies.
Drown and overwhelm.
Let them attack you and just use your hospitals to recover any casualties you lose. I've played whole games where I've never lost a Cat. They just keep going back to the hospital and coming back out to the front lines to fight.
And I did forget to mention their special ability. It's called Field Hospitals. And whenever any one of your warriors are removed, you can spend a card matching the clearing to place place those warriors in the clearing with the keep. So if they die, you can expend these citizens to get them back to you. And so that's huge. And I would say before we move on to the birds here, a big thing that I noticed playing that I really would change playing again is that you want to get these recruiters at least to 3 recruiters as soon as possible. Because that's getting more recruiters is the only way to get up to you to get more cards. There are other ways where other characters can give you cards, but you can't count on that.
The workshops may score you more points, but they are way more situational than the recruiters or the wood, because you can always use wood to build, and sometimes you'll need more wood to build than what you have, so building more sawmills is good. And you always need Cats and you always need cards, so recruiters are peak, right? They're what you want down first. And it leaves workshops in this weird, like, do I, don't I? Sure, if I have a card to craft or a card that I can put in my tableau for more actions, sure, I'll do a workshop, but I've played whole games where I've never built a single workshop just because I need troops more than.
That was the biggest takeaway from when I played it. Was like, okay, I probably am not going to touch workshops like 1 out of 10. Like, I'm going to only touch them and focus on that play style if the cards align, and that wasn't happening.
No.
So you want to count on the safe bet of getting more wood, getting more cards by making sawmills, and especially rushing the recruiters.
Yes.
So that's the Marquis de Cat.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the Erie dynasties.
The Erie dynasties are, I don't know, they're kind of wacky. They can be difficult to get your head around because they're not like a straightforward, like, oh, I'm dudes on a map war game like the Marquis de Cat. Like, very much feels like I'm playing Risk when I'm playing Marquis de Cat. Like, it's not complicated. I'm just marching dudes around, claiming territory, and, you know, whatever, making buildings, right? But the Erie dynasties, they don't have the building complexity. They don't have a lot of this, like, slow roll type of feel to them. They can very quickly be an early game threat, very aggressive. I guess I can go through how they work here. Is they start just like every other faction with the bird song. If your hand is empty, you always draw a card at the start of your turn, because this faction is really, really reliant on you playing cards but to the faction board instead of like playing them to the discard or whatever, or crafting them. They have a disdain for trade, so they don't like to craft. They don't like that sort of thing. They're not really into like labor and like industrialism.
Yeah.
They're more like, oh, this is my land, I deserve this because I'm rich type of a mentality. And they then add 1 or 2 cards to their decree, which the decree is this top part of the board where this is where all of their actions come from in a turn. It's based on the suits of cards. So you always start with 3 cards in hand, and you're going to add cards from your hand to the decree. So say I'll add 1 to recruit and 1 to battle. So that means that I have to move troops in a matching clearing. I have to recruit in a matching clearing. That's funny. I don't have that, but like whatever, you know.
Yeah.
I'm just showing how it actually works, not actually playing it. But you add the cards to it. That gives you extra actions. It's highly recommended you put as many cards in there as possible, but don't put in cards that are going to get you in trouble.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about earlier, is you have to be careful, because if you can't complete an action, say you can't recruit in a mouse clearing, you go into turmoil and your track, what's the word, corrupts?
Essentially, everybody loses confidence in the government.
Yep.
They trash the prime minister and they elect another one.
Okay.
Because it's very reminiscent of like aristocratic like councils and aristocratic elections, and like maybe even a bit of a plutocracy, though there's other factions that mirror that more effectively, where like the rich are in charge and they're just in charge, and they choose another rich guy to be in charge of the rich guys, even though they're all technically kind of in charge.
Okay.
That's sort of the feel it's going for, is all of these people are working in a government together as sort of like a Republican value to bring back the power to the rich people, reclaim the land for the rich people. And it uses the people, the normal people, because the birds in government are actually like a malice. You don't want a lot of birds being used in your government, because if your government fails, you can lose a lot of points, but they're also really useful because they're wild.
Yeah.
So they can be used for any suit instead of just the suit that's specified by the card. So there's a lot of counterplay in there and play in there. Most of the factions, except for the cats, have this ability to come back onto the board once they've been kicked off. The birds do it in their bird song at the 3rd step. So if you have no roosts, you place 1 and 3 warriors in the clearing with the fewest warriors. So you can always come back into the game.
Always coming back.
Yep, and I've had to use this a bunch of times.
And this is what we were talking about, that's back and forth play. So you're going to fly high, you're going to crash sometime.
Oh, for sure.
You're going to hit a clean window because you thought it was the sky one, you're going to fall.
And a lot of that comes into like appropriate responses and people getting to know the game and responding to threats, like threat assessment we're talking about in Magic.
Yes.
Huge game involving threat assessment and king making and attacking the leader. There's a lot of these political options to be, choices to be made and moves to be made, because every single faction has a very glaring weakness that once you know it, it can be kind of easy to exploit and take advantage of. The birds, though, then can come back onto the board, that back and forth, can craft using roosts. Now, the birds have this ability to craft, but they don't get as much of a reward as anybody else, so you're not really incentivized. You want to put most of your cards into the top up here if you can.
Into the track.
Oh yeah, you
into the decree.
Right, and smart moves would be putting cards into move. If you don't have a card, like what I should do with this is probably, I don't know, put them both in the move, or maybe, both in the move. So then
you go recruit, there's nothing, then you have 3 cards in move, so you're gonna move however many. Mouse, another one to mouse, and then anywhere.
Right.
And so that's all usually a safe bet, because movement is pretty easy action to do.
Right. And you can always just move back and forth and things of that nature, where these moves you can just waste them and burn them, whereas battles and recruits, if there's no troops in those clearings, you can't get to those clearings. There's a lot of options, or a lot of problems with these columns. That's why you don't want a lot of cards in there. You don't want a lot of viziers or advisors in there.
Yes.
And then in daylight, the second part of daylight after crafting is resolving the decree, which is what we were just talking about, is all the actions come from the decree, which is this top part of the board. And that's where a lot of the sort of brain burn, the really getting into the weeds of it with the Eerie comes from, is how can I arrange my decree to best help me win the game, but also not be so fragile that anybody can just knock it over.
Yeah.
So the more complicated the system, the easier it is to break.
Easier it is to break, and that's like you were saying. As the other factions, they're paying attention. If they're paying attention, they're like, "Ooh, it's getting risky over there. Let me."
And everyone should always pay attention to the decree, because the Eerie dynasties can rack up the most actions out of any other faction in the game. Like they can have so many. I've seen just huge stacks of actions going on every single turn.
And be careful, right? I think that's the biggest takeaway: is be very careful, because if someone interferes with you, boom, that track tumbles down. You're gonna lose some points.
And when it falls hard.
It falls hard. Yes. Is this the only faction that actually loses victory points?
Yep.
It's the only one that can go backwards. So
Right.
High risk, high reward gameplay. I really like that. But at the bottom of the hour, let's move on to the Woodland Alliance. Yeah, let's.
Real quick, some good strategies with the Eerie before we move on. Sorry about that. Is generally these guys are really good at picking on insurgencies. The cats are really good at drowning people in bodies. The Eerie dynasties are actually really good at attacking, and you should lean into that and try to victimize insurgencies and rack up a lot of points from removing tokens and buildings.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Battling is a great way to get points with the bird.
Oh yeah, huge, because you can just put like 5 battle cards and you're just constantly battling every single turn.
Nice. That's awesome.
But
That's risky too. But we'll move on. We got
Woodland
a few
Alliance.
minutes. We don't want to.
Sorry about that.
Yes. So let's hit up the Woodland Alliance. Tell us about the Woodland Alliance.
The Woodland Alliance Vanguard party in the woods, right? Like we talked about. These guys get angry if you mess with their people, and their people are represented by sympathy, which is essentially they've convinced the denizens of this clearing that they are sympathetic to the Woodland Alliance cause, which is rule for the people, by the people, something like that. It can be anything. It can be a fundamental Islamic society, something like that, right? It can literally be anything, as long as it's like a vanguardist party. The Novemberists in Russia, the Decemberists in Russia, right? That was a liberal movement. It can be any political identity, but it's an insurgency and it's a vanguardist. They get angry when people mess with their stuff through outrage, so people have to pay them cards if you move into their territory.
Which is miserable.
Right.
Playing against them.
And the Woodland Alliance, being the little folk, they have the best fighters in the game, the best soldiers. They have some of the fewest soldiers, but their soldiers pound for pound are better because of guerrilla warfare, right? If ever they are attacked, they take high rolls. So whenever a combat happens, high rolls goes to the attacker, low rolls go to the defender. But in this case, if the Woodland Alliance is the defender, they would get the high rolls.
Switch them, yes, because there are 2 D12s that have 0, 1, 2, and 3 on the sides. So.
And that shows how the little people, the folk, us, we know our lands better than anybody else. We know our homes better than anybody else. And so when that's militarized, it creates a really knowledgeable and potent force. And that's where the guerrilla warfare comes in. Is it's a very like state of mind type of warfare where you're fighting for your home. You're not going to give up your home to just anybody. Moving into the rest of the mechanics here, Birdsong, they can revolt. So this is on any of their sympathy on the board, they can spend cards from their supporters, which are secret denizens of the forest that have sworn their allegiance to the cause, and they lie low in the provinces and in the territories for the Woodland Alliance to give the signal, and they'll rise up in rebellion, building a base, recruiting soldiers and officers there, and that's what revolting is. And essentially that just destroys everything. A lot of these factions are creative and destructive forces, or using both. This one uses both. It destroys in order to create an organization that will then free everyone, or free all the little folk in the country for whatever cause. And then they have spread sympathy, which is what you're going to be doing most of the time, which is spending cards from your hand, or from your supporters, to put sympathy onto the board. And these are tokens that get you points as you place them, and they also trigger that outrage when people interact with them or move through those clearings. So you're constantly trying to get card value and value that way. And it's really easy for the Woodland Alliance to get out of control with cards and card value, because people will just move through their territory without realizing
I know. I was running into that as the cat. I'm like, I can't move through there. I have no cards.
It just creates this like grit lockdown. And that's one of their best strategies, is to just like put sympathy in all the places that's going to irritate people.
Yes.
And then moving to daylight, here's where you craft using sympathy. This is one of the craftiest factions. They have some of the best crafting ability out of any faction, and that's a huge strategy for them, is like get points but also craft, focus on crafting. Immobilize is adding a card from your hand to supporters stack. This is going to happen a lot. This is usually you put your whole first hand into there, unless you have something else going on, which really generally you don't.
Yeah.
Training, spend a card from your hand matching a built base to place a warrior in the officer's box. This is only relevant when you have bases on the board, and this you generally don't want to do too many times, because you want to have soldiers on the board. You don't necessarily want to have officers.
Because that takes a piece away from the soldiers. You have to put it on your board. So.
And officers make your soldiers more capable, but they aren't soldiers. So you got to keep that in mind and balance it.
Yeah.
Moving on to evening, military operations only happen once you have a base, because only when you have a base do you have soldiers. And this is using your officers as actions, as pieces to count for actions, and moving around your soldiers. And this is also where the most powerful Woodland Alliance move is, bar none. Spreading sympathy in the birdsong, the second one here, costs cards from your supporters, which your supporters are also used to build bases. So you want to use these to build as many bases as you possibly can instead of spreading sympathy. Military operations is how you spread sympathy without spending any cards. Without losing any card advantage. You use your soldiers. You recruit soldier, and you can move them and turn them into sympathy.
I see. That's super powerful.
And that will rack up tons of points. And then as you uncover sympathy, as you uncover bases give you extra draw cards. And that's super potent to get tons of draw cards. And then you're also drawing off sympathy. So the Woodland Alliance has some of the best card draw in the game.
I know, it's so frustrating seeing them draw so many cards when I'm the cats. I'm like, one, please.
And everything they do sort of wraps into that organizing to create sympathy, creating sympathy to create outrage, and the outrage gives you cards. And the more cards you have, you can build bases, so then you can organize and keep doing that all over again.
And what I learned is it's frustrating to move into their areas, but you got to do it. You got to shut them down early.
You have to.
Springboard. Oh, so time to speedrun the Vagabond.
Speedrun the Vagabond.
Vagabond is a solo piece. You can move any clearing. They also are the only faction that can move into these wooded areas between the clearings, but they can move regardless of who rules there. So they're moving in and out. They're making alliances. They're making just building the relationships. That's how they get points. And you're trying to get to these item pieces throughout the game that you can see up here. You'll get those from people crafting. You can get them from people that craft by giving them cards, building your alliances with them. And if you get hostile with them, you'll get extra points for destroying their things. If you get allied with them, you'll get extra points for fighting with them.
Yep, and giving them cards.
And the thing one of their special mechanics is quest cards. So you're looking, these are alternate ways to get cards and get points. So these are really important to see and do as you play through the game. I would say, just at the bottom of the hour here, the main strategy for the Vagabond, for other players, don't let them get out of control.
Yep.
And grab as many items as possible, because it's important to attack them, destroy their items.
Yeah.
But I think that wraps it up, Ron.
All right.
Oh, speedrun the Vagabond. Oh man. So I feel bad for the Vagabond, but it really is. Get as many items as possible. Get as many actions as possible.
Right.
But I think we got to wrap up. So if you have any questions about Root, you want to talk more about the Vagabond, send us some questions at shareddiscoveryshow@gmail.com.
Yep.
Thank you again to BCTV for having us, letting us do this show, talk about one of our favorite games.
Right.
It's always a blast. So I want to say thanks for joining us on episode 14 of Shared Discovery. And as we close, be sure to make sure, wow, a lot of sure there.
Yeah, sure,
have
sure,
fun.
sure.
Be kind to others, play some games, and send us off, Ron.
Oh yeah, riches must be divided, but real wealth can be shared.
Thanks, guys.
I knew that was gonna happen.
I know. We got the whole episode without doing that. That was great.